Hi, everybody. I know people are joining us, and just to account for the lag sometimes and people jumping on, I'm just going to give us about 30 seconds before we start. I know we're very excited to have this conversation tonight. Well, great. Well, welcome everybody to the JCC Chicago Jewish Film Festival. Tonight's panel is in partnership with NCJW Chicago North Shore section, and we're really excited to have you join us tonight. Hopefully our attendees have had the chance to view the incredible film, Belly of the Beast. And we're excited to talk both about the film and the state of reproductive health and reproductive justice in carceral settings in Illinois. I'm Alexis Mansfield, and I am the Senior Advisor on issues related to children and families at the Women's Justice Institute. I'm also the Senior Attorney at Ascend Justice and the Incarcerated Survivors Project. I've worked with several thousand women and people who are incarcerated in women's facilities in Illinois, as well as a specific focus on people who are pregnant or have recently given birth within the Illinois Department of Corrections, Cook County Department of Corrections, and other settings across Illinois. So I am excited to talk about this film and the relationship it has to issues in Illinois as well. And I've seen this film before, Erica. We have hosted a screening on it before, and I was just as impacted watching it again this weekend. So I'd like to introduce Erica Cohn, who's also here, two-time Emmy, Peabody, and DGA award-winning filmmaker who has received numerous other awards. Most recently, she directed and produced the New York Times Critics' Pick, Emmy Award-winning, and Peabody-nominated Belly of the Beast, which we're here to discuss tonight. Her current releases also include the New York Times OpDocs short film, What You'll Remember, a beautiful portrait of a family who reframes their experiences of homelessness. Previously, Erica directed and produced The Judge, another Peabody Award-winning and Emmy-nominated film about the first woman judge appointed to the Middle East Sharia courts. And she also co-directed and produced In Football We Trust, which I am hoping to watch soon, an Emmy Award-winning feature documentary about young Pacific Islander men pursuing their dreams of playing professional football. She grew up attending many film festivals, and she studied at Chapman University in California and Hebrew University in Jerusalem. She has a degree in film production, Middle East studies, and acting performance. In 2013, she founded Wild Films, Inc. And in her spare time, she's an avid documentary maker, photographer, music editor, and performing artist. Quite the resume. And Erica is currently in development with her first fiction feature, which we hope will debut soon. And she's represented by APA. Next, I'd like to introduce Anya Tanya Voody. She has over 20 years experience working in the fields of education, nonprofit leadership, and community engagement. She earned her bachelor's degree in elementary education and master's degree in sociocultural studies and educational thought, both from Western Michigan University. Her work history has included administrative leadership of a birth justice organization, a community schools department, youth development program administration, teaching at the elementary level, and strategic planning consultation. Ms. Tanya Voody is an expert in emerging strategies and priorities in community organizing in schools, including education equity policy and research, the impact of social and emotional learning and restorative justice, literacy development, culturally relevant pedagogy, and family and community engagement. She's the president of the Evanston-Skokie D65 Board of Education. In addition, she's executive director of Chicago Volunteer Doulas, a birth justice organization providing comprehensive doula care to the Chicagoland community, and the first doula program of its kind in the nation, where peer doulas at Logan Correctional Center provide for people who are currently incarcerated, provide care as doulas to their fellow incarcerated pregnant people. And lastly, Ms. Tanya Voody and her husband are the proud parents of 3 amazing children. And our final panelist tonight is Hannah McCaffrey, who is pulling double duty, watching her daughter at the same time, a feeling that I think most of us know very well, or many of us know well. Hannah McCaffrey is 25 years old. She's an extremely proud mother of a daughter who is about to turn 3 years old this week. Hannah is a survivor of incarceration where she endured huge medical issues while giving birth to her daughter in prison. Hannah's goal is to make a difference, not just in her own life, but in her daughter's life, so that her daughter doesn't have to go through what she experienced. So everybody, I hope that we can give a nice warm welcome to our panelists. I do have some questions for all of you, but I also want to ask the audience and the attendees tonight, if you have questions, please feel free to ask them and they will be passed along to us. So Erica, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you. You've created many documentaries, as we just heard, across a really large range of topics. So what drew you to this story? And how did you even learn what was happening?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me for this incredible conversation. And I'm really excited and honored to be in all of your virtual presences in this space that we're in. And thank you everyone who's tuning in from Chicago or wherever you might be this evening. So I started this project over a decade ago. I was so fortunate to meet attorney Cynthia Chandler in 2010 through a mutual friend. And I was incredibly inspired by her work. She was the first attorney in California to get someone out of prison under compassionate release. And I was also very inspired by her organization, Justice Now, which was the only organization in the country that had board members who are currently incarcerated, really informing strategy and informing approach from the inside out, as opposed to the outside in, which is how so many organizations in this space work. And they had a particular campaign called the Let Our Families Have a Future campaign, which essentially exposed the multiple ways that prisons destroy the basic fundamental human right to family. One of the most heinous, of course, being the illegal sterilizations, primarily targeting women of color. And when I first heard about this, immediately it screamed eugenics. You know, as a Jewish woman, the phrase "never again" was always in the back of my mind. And when I learned about this different kind of genocide that was happening more generally through imprisonment like as a whole, through mass incarceration, and more specifically through the illegal sterilizations, I knew that I wanted to get involved some way, somehow. And initially that was as a volunteer. Cynthia invited me into the organization, where I later became a volunteer legal advocate, providing direct services for people inside California's women's prisons. But initially that was doing campaign videos and editing little promos to get the word out about mass incarceration, to get the word out about how prisons function as a form of eugenics. This was in the prison expansion era in California, and really wanted to talk a lot about the connection with mass incarceration and the legacy of eugenics and the legacy of white supremacy. And later, as I mentioned, I became a volunteer legal advocate, and through that work met so many incredible people inside who, in collaboration with, we began a project that would ultimately become Belly of the Beast. And kind of in the initial inception of this idea, it was really to chronicle the incredible human rights work that was happening inside prison. The documentation work was happening inside prison, peer to peer, and how the information was funneled out through this underground network of activists, because of course the prison didn't want this information getting out. And so we began this journey to figure out a way to document that documentation process. And that kind of changed a couple of years into the process when I had an opportunity to meet Kelly Dillon, who at the time was living and working in LA, doing the incredible community activism work that she does. She was doing gang intervention work and domestic violence prevention work. And at that particular moment was not interested in telling her story, but was interested in coming on board the creative team to kind of advise the process and to really talk about how we can place audiences into the world of incarceration, which many audiences don't have access to outside of mainstream media that hypersexualizes or dramatizes or sensationalizes women's prisons. And that kind of relationship with Kelly changed in 2013, 2014, when the Center for Investigative Reporting released their very controversial findings on the tubal ligations that were happening during labor and delivery in California's women's prisons. And for the first time, even though Justice Now had been working on this issue for over a decade, for the first time, people were paying attention. For the first time, there was a national conversation. For the first time, there was potential for legislation, and there were going to be a series of hearings. And that was the moment that Kelly got called back into the movement. They really needed her to testify on behalf of so many other people who would otherwise be unable to testify. And that was the moment that we decided that we would film Kelly leading up to the moment when she was going to testify. And the more and more we filmed, the more abundantly clear it became to everyone involved that the film really needed to center around Kelly's story and her relationship with Cynthia Chandler, and Kelly being the catalyst of this entire investigation to begin with. If it hadn't been for Kelly's courage and selfless advocacy, not only for her, but for others, and to continue fighting to investigate, to what degree this was happening, how pervasive it really was, there wouldn't be a film, there wouldn't have been CIR's incredible work. We wouldn't be here today having this conversation. So I think it really all stems back to that initial discovery by Kelly and her courage and perseverance in seeking justice.
Thank you. Speaking of centering on the voices and experiences of people with lived experience, I'd like to ask Hannah. Hannah, I know that the film, I know you got a chance to see the film, talked a lot about obstetric and gynecological care that people receive in prison. I think the image of the doctor eating a sandwich while performing exams sticks with people very strongly. But you also mentioned before in your bio that you gave birth as of this Tuesday, 3 years ago, inside the Illinois Department of Corrections. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the day that you gave birth, and if you feel like the medical staff listened to you and how that impacted you.
Yeah, most definitely. I was about a month along when I went to prison, maybe a little over a month along when I was pregnant with my daughter, Delilah. And then she was supposed to be a Valentine's baby. Can't do that, Delilah. And one night I was just sitting in the day room. Everything was normal, fine, that I thought. And all of a sudden I thought, I'm talking, baby. Okay. And I'm sorry. And my water broke. And so I went to the bathroom and I checked, and one of the inmates said that my mucus plug came out. I didn't know anything about that. I was a first-time mom. So we went to the guard and said that my water broke. They sent me to the medical unit, the doctor, and they laid me on the table, and it was 2 males in training. They weren't official yet, nothing. They were in training, and they visually checked me without physically checking me. And I'm bleeding and I'm leaking all over the table. And the nurse that, she was the certified nurse, she just sat in the background doing nothing on her phone. And they said that I was Braxton Hicks, I was overreacting. And then they sent me back to my housing unit. And then not even 5 minutes later, I started having contractions. That was 2 minutes apart. It was so painful. I couldn't lay down. I couldn't do nothing. The inmates came all together and laid a mattress in the hallway for me, timed my contractions. And it was getting to the point where it was unbearable. So we called for the nursing again, and they denied to come down there, saying that I was overreacting. And then they finally came down and they visually checked me again, and they left. And then they left, baby. And then it became unbearable again. And then we called again. They still wouldn't come. And it was to the point where the inmates had to like threat them, saying that they were going to do something to my baby and me for them to even come down there. They finally came down there again, visually checked me, the same thing all over again. And they were just having a conversation, laughing out in the hallway. And I scooted past them. I was bare naked. I felt like I was constipated. So like, I was like, okay, maybe I have to go to number 2, go to the bathroom. And I felt myself down there and something just felt so different, wrong. So I had another inmate. I told her, I'm like, you're going to have to check me. I feel something down there. And she looked, she didn't even have to check me. She said that she saw a head. So I took it upon myself to lay down on the shower floor and start pushing. You know, not even maybe 15 minutes later, my daughter Delilah popped right on out. And then maybe 10, 15 minutes later, that's when they called the ambulance and then they came. And then they made me get up and walk to the stretcher after everything was done. Yes.
I'm so sorry, Hannah. That's a horrifying experience. Obviously Delilah is beautiful and well, but it sounds like, how many times do you think you asked the medical staff for help?
I would say over 3 times. Honestly, yeah.
So I know we just got a question about that, this film was really horrifying, and do things like that still happen in prison? So you delivered on the shower floor 3 years ago this week, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of have a question that ties into Anya about that, because I know since you delivered, there's been a lot of women pregnant people inside the Department of Corrections who already had often inductions scheduled instead of going into labor naturally, that there's been even more people who now have their induction scheduled, as we say, voluntarily. But I think as the film talks about coercive control and what's truly voluntary in prison are big questions. So Anya, I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about coercive control that people experience in prison, especially having heard Hannah's story, really your horrifying story, Hannah. And how does Chicago Volunteer Doulas, where you're the executive director, try to empower pregnant people in prison to feel agency in making decisions? And have you experienced that coercive control still plays a role in birthing decisions?
That's a really large question. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you, Hannah, for your bravery and your vulnerability. And thank you to your little one for sharing you with us. And it's lovely to meet you, Erica. Chicago Volunteer Doulas supports both peer doulas as well as pregnant folks who are incarcerated. And, lack of birth justice in general certainly occurs at the intersection of the dehumanization of bodies with uterus, as well as Black bodies. And gynecology itself was founded on the torture of Black femme bodies and Black bodies with uterus. So, and we know that the carceral state is rooted in violence as well, and particularly is an exercise in white supremacist patriarchal violence in many ways. And so, we're not surprised nor unfamiliar as an organization that's committed to birth justice and that is operating in solidarity with marginalized communities, to see that the carceral state was not giving loving, holistic, informed care to folks that deserve it, and to see the carceral state being dehumanizing. One of the things that we did notice immediately was that every pregnant person that we were allowed to have a caring relationship with was given an expected induction date as opposed to an expected due date. And as an organization committed to birth justice, we absolutely, support clients who need inductions or clients who choose inductions. But we also acknowledge that a induction is a incredibly challenging mode of delivery. And it also, in many instances, is a predictor for cesarean intervention. And I noted as I rewatched Belly of the Beast again recently, I think I've seen the documentary 3 times. It's equally affecting every single time. I pick up new details each time. And it's such an important conversation. It's difficult content to consume as well as a Black woman. But yeah, to assign folks expected induction dates without, and what we are so appreciative of is that our doulas who are trained can have a conversation with clients, with their peers, about what an induction entails, so that they are allowed to have more information and inquiry about that assigned expected induction date, in hopes of giving them greater access to birth justice through information. But the reality is that prior to the beginning of the peer doula program, and for any person who is pregnant that doesn't have access to a peer doula or a peer doula mentor, they are not experiencing the opportunity to provide informed consent in a decision that is likely going to foretell a major surgery for the delivery of their infant, and in an experience that is likely going to be emotionally difficult regardless, because of the rules around separation of parents and infants. And so, as far as Chicago Volunteer Doulas goes, we see ourselves as a anti-racist, queer Black feminist organization that is rooted in the belief that when folks are given the information to empower themselves, that they experience justice themselves, that they experience justice going forward for future generations, and that is a right that everyone has. And we want to provide that, as gainfully as possible. And unfortunately, the carceral state is not designed for that kind of loving care. And so we do everything that we can to do that. And we do that by trusting folks who are already caring for their peers. And I think Hannah's story highlights that significantly. Kelly's organizing, highlighted in the documentary, highlights that significantly. There is love and care in the carceral state in terms of the folks who are incarcerated and who are providing loving and compassionate care to each other. And so our peer doula program invests in that belief and that reality. And, and CVD really operates in a mode of solidarity. We understand that we are at our highest function when we are led by the folks who are impacted by the injustice that we are trying to prevent. And I think that theme, I see that theme throughout.
Thank you. Yeah, I think at the Women's Justice Institute, we share that same belief with Chicago Volunteer Doulas, and I think Justice Now as well. That we have to be led by those who have lived experience and know what needs to happen. I think about some of your peer doulas and some of the pregnant people inside that, much like the testimony in the film, and much like the Association of Nurses, when they're talking about what about people who choose to have these procedures. I've heard many people, when asked if their induction is voluntary, say, well, I don't want to end up having to give birth on the shower floor. That it can never be truly voluntary because the threat of what the other option is hangs over them, and the stress of prison and everything else that is occurring at that moment makes it very difficult to give fully informed consent without coercion. Erica, I'm curious, given some of that we saw in the film, and that it sounds like you experienced firsthand as well. What's been some of the pushback? Have you received any pushback on the film? Have you had people question the kind of the conclusions about the horror of what occurred, and whether or not tubal ligation should be banned while people are incarcerated?
I think that a lot of people prior to the film had a lot of questions similar to ACOG did, and ACOG ultimately came around and supported the bill in the end, and supports this film and supports the reparation movement. But there's, I think, a very white progressive viewpoint about access. And this is really kind of draws a distinct difference between reproductive justice and reproductive rights, and not fully understanding that in the free world, where any one of us can most likely have access to Google, to most likely have access to more information. Some of us have access to second opinions. I mean, healthcare in this country is horrendous. To begin with, I'm not saying that people have access to all kinds of medical care, appropriate medical care in the free world, but there's not the kind of second opinions, there's not the kind of access to information in prison for one to make a decision about one's body with freedom of information like we have. And I think that ACOG didn't understand the coercive nature and the legacy of sterilizations, and how deeply rooted it is in the United States, and how deeply rooted the legacy of sterilization in the United States is connected to the legacy of white supremacy. And after this film, I feel like it's very clear. So we haven't had a lot of pushback from people who perhaps wanted sterilization as an option for the purpose of birth control inside. I think what has been really illuminating is that eugenics is alive and well, and some of the responses that we have received, some of the comments that people are posting after articles about the film or articles about eugenics is very much in line with the social media montage that you see in the film. And I really hope that some of the takeaways are, that eugenics one is alive and well, because we're seeing that in real time. And it's not just limited to our criminal legal system. It's not just limited to healthcare access in prison. That eugenics is kind of what we're seeing in real time. Who has access to healthcare during the pandemic? We're witnessing systemic racism and population control through policing, through, the immigration detention system. We're seeing it through so many different facets of our society. And so I hope that this film kind of shines a light on one aspect, but kind of opens up the conversation to a more broad discussion about the legacy of eugenics and white supremacy.
Thank you. I just want to remind our attendees, if anyone has questions, that they should feel free to ask that. And I think your comments are even more on point tonight, although this should always be a discussion that we're having, but at the Jewish Film Festival, to JCC, Jewish Film Festival, to be talking about the history of eugenics. I did not know before Belly of the Beast that the Nazis came to California to learn from the experts there. Erica, did you do research on that? And was there anything that surprised you in making the film?
I think that was probably one of the most surprising aspects, is to see that footage, the picnicking in California. I had no idea I knew about our eugenics legacy in the United States. I had no idea how pervasive it was and how it was used as a model for Nazi Germany. That was incredibly disturbing. I will say that in this process, nothing really shocked me, because once you do this work, this film wouldn't be possible if I wasn't so deeply embedded in the movement. A lot of people are surprised when they see this film, like, oh, I thought that forced sterilization was a thing of the past. And I think that that's, it's been a couple of years of reckoning in this country, the racial justice reckoning that we're in, and I hope to continue to be in. When news of the forced detention, the forced sterilization in the immigration detention center in Georgia came out, all of a sudden there was another kind of question about how could this be happening in our immigration detention centers? It's like this is happening in so many other places across the US. And we actually did a bunch of research. We sent Freedom of Information Act requests to dozens of states across the country. And many states said, we don't have this information. Many states never responded, but we know that at least 8 states still practice sterilizations for the purpose of birth control in their prisons. And I will say from, doing direct service work and speaking with other organizations that do direct service work around the country, there are many reports, the narrative tradition is very strong in this kind of, in this work. And because of the layers of secrecy that these institutions hide behind, and all the privacy regulations that they hide behind, it's very difficult to uncover exact numbers, but we do know that it is happening.
Thank you. Yes, I think we see that often, not just on the eugenics side, but also on the destruction of culture side, with the interface between departments of corrections, the system of mass incarceration, and all the different carceral settings with the child welfare system, that we see that disparate impact, particularly in Illinois, but in every state where families, people of color, are separated from their children at much, much higher numbers. So that even if you have children that you are able to have, so much more often they're taken away, including for those who are incarcerated. So I guess I would ask this question to Anya. So we saw on Belly of the Beast about forced and coerced sterilization, that it targeted women of color, particularly dark-skinned women, as well as people who are trans. And we heard from Kelly Dillon about her experiences surviving domestic violence, just to be punished for that survival, for her own self-defense. As we've seen in Illinois, where we had the No Selves to Defend movement, and national movements like Survived and Punished. How do you think women of color are particularly impacted when it comes to reproductive justice and criminalization of reproductive rights and reproductive justice, and reproductive health as part of that?
Thank you for the question. I don't want to be too abstract, but when I first read the, I think 2017 publication from Illinois Health Department, the maternal infant mortality, I think, handbook, it highlighted that essentially Black embryos don't survive as often as white embryos. And at the time that I read that, I was about 6 months out from having suffered a postpartum intracranial brain hemorrhage that was not predicted by my health history, my race, or my health history, my education, or my income, but solely predicted by my race. And so I was reading statistics that were about me, and I had to choke back tears in reading that. And I thought, Black bodies are treated as if we are undervalued from our conception, that we are dehumanized and treated with such malice that we can't even survive fetal state without having disproportionate outcomes. And as someone who loves myself, who loves my family, my friends, my neighbors, who are also targeted by this systemic malice, and knowing that each and every one of our humanity deserves to dream big and to have hopes and to be loved and cared for and have joy. That's just painful information to consume. And I felt it in my heart and my soul when Kelly Dillon said, I want to have a house. I just want to be joyful. I want to live my life. I want to move forward. I want to be whole. Like, I felt that. So it's not shocking. Every single system has these disparate outcomes, specifically targeting bodies with uterus that are Black in ways that are disproportionate. And we can see that disproportionality change with proximity to whiteness. If we disaggregate any data and we do a paper bag test on that data, the closer that data gets to the proximity of Europeanness and versus the closeness of that data to proximity to Africanness, we will see statistical evidence of the animus and the violence, systemic violence towards bodies like my own and other bodies that have uterus that are Black and proximate to Africanness. And as Chicago Volunteer Doulas also does our work with care and acknowledgement that every birthing body is not a cis body, that there are many people with uterus that give birth to children who identify in many different ways on the gender spectrum, including woman, man, non-binary, and in many other gender identities. And those folks experience the animus of gender oppression during their pregnancy and trying to access reproductive health on a regular basis. And so it is not okay. It is, however, not surprising that the California data demonstrated that forced sterilization was particularly violent and targeted towards Black and brown and trans folks. And so I'm sorry, I hope that was not a long or meandering answer, but that was my initial thought on that data.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing your own story and own experiences too. I see we have a question. Somebody asked how many pregnant people are currently incarcerated, and I'm guessing that's particular to Illinois, and as well as how many births did the doulas attend, which I think is might be a tricky question to answer, but I will answer about the number of people who are incarcerated who are pregnant in Illinois. In terms of the Illinois Department of Corrections, the number varies. About 82% of people who are incarcerated in women's facilities in Illinois are mothers. That is one of the unique factors in the incarceration of women, is the number of people who are moms, as well as the fact that for moms prior to incarceration, about 70% of them were the primary caregivers of their children. For fathers, it's under 10%. And so that means that when a mom is incarcerated, their children have to go somewhere. And so there's a lot more displacement. And so I bring that up because a lot of people are sent to prison. It's timed in such a way so that often they've just given birth. There are a lot of programs where people might be in jail and they're literally furloughed to go and give birth and then turn themselves back in. It is a cost shifting measure and a medical shifting measure that people will be kept in jail until they give birth. And then for that month that they're due, they might be sent out to go and give birth and then come back voluntarily separate from their child. Or not voluntarily, but expected that they will just come back, but for some reason are held in custody all that time until that point. And so the numbers don't necessarily tell the full story. Because of the pandemic, there has been a shift in the population that we hope will stay, in that the number of people in prison has decreased. Right now, there are 7 pregnant people inside the Illinois Department of Corrections. It varies across the over 90 jails in Illinois and in 102 counties. And so no one knows, actually. There is very little data kept on how many pregnant people there are. There's been basically one national study that really looked at the number, and even then that was incomplete, and there's no accounting for all the people who are kept in jail. We do have a special law in Illinois that requires that people who are pretrial and who are pregnant are supposed to be released if we can show, unless they can show that they are a specific threat to somebody in the community. However, that law is often not followed, and we have many, many clients who are held in custody while pregnant. So it's difficult to answer that question. I cannot say how many total, and I can just say at this exact moment because that number fluctuates day by day. And Anya, in terms of the number of births that doulas attend each year, would you like to answer that?
Yes, I can. When we conceived of the peer doula program in partnership with folks from WJI, as well as other folks who are incarcerated, that though we have abolitionist values as an organization, that the program itself is a harm reduction program. And with that, as such, in order to fulfill that commitment to reduce harm, that we did need to work within the systems that were available to us. And what was available to our peer doulas and to us as an organization was to train our peer doulas to provide prenatal support as well as postpartum support. Our doulas provide information and as much educational content as they can to pregnant folks to prepare themselves and whatever support person is available to join them at the hospital for labor and delivery. But our doulas are not allowed to leave the grounds to join their clients for actual delivery. Our doulas are able to give prenatal education and postpartum support, which is an incredible harm reduction, because the information that they're able to provide prenatally allows folks to engage in informed consent decision-making for themselves. And it also allows them to have emotional support in thinking about how they want to care for themselves postpartum, how they want to care for their infants postpartum, what arrangements they want to make for where their infants are going to go, to reduce anxiety in that separation as much as possible, to support folks in thinking about providing human milk for their infants, and if they want to pump, and thinking about what are the arrangements that need to be made in order to provide human milk for their infants. And so, these are the types of details that a system that's engaging with communities with animus, that does not care about the interests of vulnerable people, those details don't seem to matter to to these systems, but they make an incredible impact in terms of how empowered and how much agency one feels in a time where I think folks are at their most vulnerable, but also their most powerful. And they deserve to feel that way as they enter into their journey in caring for their children, but also caring for themselves. And we were able to train our first and only cohort of doulas in December of 2019. So we were just shy of being able to provide you support, Hannah, and I wish that we had been able to do that. But so far, our doulas have supported clients in prenatal and postpartum, but have not been able to attend any births. Long answer to a short question.
Oh, it's a complicated issue. And then speaking of that, I would like to ask Hannah. Hannah, beyond ensuring that we do not send pregnant people to prison and people in general, what is one thing that you'd like to change about the way that women or pregnant people are treated when incarcerated?
No more crying. I was gonna say like more advocates, but she basically explained everything that I wanted, because I definitely felt hopeless mentally, emotionally, physically. I was numb. So that was my biggest thing, was the doulas. And to hear her talk about that and that they finally did it, it makes me have a lot of hope. So I'm definitely blessed for that.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. Well, and I would like to, I know we're wrapping up. I'd like to ask Erica, a two-part question. Do you have any update in terms of the reparation movement? And two, what's next for you?
Well, thank you for that. I just also wanted to kind of also continue the thread about, in terms of what we all should be doing. And like, I very much believe in a world that exists, a safe, compassionate world without prisons. And oftentimes I think we ask, like, how can we support, how can we change things without supporting the system? And it's supporting people first, supporting folks inside, responding to their needs. And, when we talk about education inside and some of the resources, I just want to say that we did a book drive, so this would have been a year ago, because folks inside asked for, reproductive healthcare information and healthcare information. And I think it's important to note that so many books are banned. Our Bodies, Ourselves, which is like the quintessential reproductive healthcare book, is banned. Most books on transgender healthcare are banned. And so, there's many workarounds within the system. And I encourage everyone who's listening to find a way to get involved with local organizations on the ground that support people first, and not perpetuate the kind of cycle of imprisonment and supporting ultimately the prison. So I wanted to kind of put that out there. And I wanted to say also that Belly of the Beast, I wanted people to not only be exposed to the horrors of mass incarceration and the heinous human rights abuses that happen inside, and to bring some of these human rights abuses to light to a larger audiences, but also to celebrate the incredible advocacy of folks inside, and to celebrate the care and compassion for folks inside, and incredible advocacy that happens peer to peer, and also for all of us who are watching to be encouraged. If this small team, a team that is incarcerated, can go up against the Department of Corrections and create change, all of us can create change. And I want to encourage people who are watching this tonight to take one small action in challenging white supremacy in your community. And I also want to tell you that if you haven't yet heard, reparations did pass in California. As you know from the film, between 1909 and 1979, California sterilized 20,000 people under state law, accounting for 1/3 of the eugenic sterilizations nationwide. And although the state, repealed its eugenics law in 1979, clearly was continuing to sterilize people in California's women's prisons until quite recently. And so California is now the first state to provide notification of coerced sterilization, which I think is a very important point here. Many people still to this day don't know that they were sterilized. So to have the state actually provide notification of that sterilization is really important. Provide medical records is incredibly important, as well as reparation to survivors who were sterilized. It's the third state to do so, following in the footsteps of North Carolina and Virginia, who provided reparations for the historic eugenics survivors, but California is the first for modern day sterilization. And I think it's time for other states to follow. But I want to leave you with that beacon of hope that we can create change. And I hope that all of you are inspired to do so tonight.
Thank you. And Erica, I know because it was a question that we were asked, do you want to share what's next for you if you have a next project?
Yes, I would love to. You mentioned What You'll Remember, the short documentary in your introduction, which is a beautiful portrait of family and security and home as told through two young parents who, for over 15 years, were struggling with housing instability. And at the beginning of the pandemic, secured an apartment in San Francisco, their four children's first stable address. And I am in the process of turning that film into a fiction feature with the family, and excited to be able to bring that to audiences soon. And if you haven't had a chance to see What You'll Remember, you can find it on the New York Times Op Docs, where you will meet the incredible Elizabeth Herrera, who shot, narrates, and is featured in the film. So check it out.
Wow, sounds great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists, to Anya and Hannah, for sharing what you do, and Hannah for sharing your story and what you experienced. I think we all want to send a happy birthday to Delilah and happy birthing day to you this week. It's hard to believe that she is 3 years old. And I want to encourage people, like Erica said, there are so many organizations that you can get involved with, so many ways that you can support people instead of structures and relics, or not even relics, current examples of white supremacy and eugenics. So please, we have many ways to get involved with the Reclamation Project at the Women's Justice Institute. You can follow us online and social media. I know that Chicago Volunteer Doulas has many ways to get involved, and there are many, many wonderful organizations. So thank you to Erica, to Anya, to Hannah, to NCJW, and to JCC Jewish Film Festival. We're so appreciative of everyone joining us tonight. Take care.